morning and welcome to Connie Nurseries. My name is Deb Poole. I'm from the Trenton location, but I'm here on site in Waterdown today to talk to you about seeding. My adventures in seeding began probably when I was in high school. During the summer I used to work at a greenhouse and we are involved in seeding annuals and vegetables. My job was what's called pricking off, so taking all those little young seedlings, putting them into the trays, and getting them all lined up so they could grow on. We tended to those seedlings for weeks and weeks, and then finally spring came, the plants were full, and then I had to get up at 3 in the morning so I could get the truck loaded so that we could be to market by 5 a.m. and sell all of the produce that we had grown for gardeners like yourselves to then be able to put into your vegetable gardens. So that's kind of what started my time of seeding. I enjoyed so much just to walk into the greenhouse and to smell that wonderful fresh soil. But then at night I would go home and I would dream of hundreds of thousands of little tiny plants, and that's all I could think of. So it was kind of a love-hate relationship. As I grew up and had a home of my own and my own yard, I found my budget was a little slim. And so going to the garden center to buy all of my bedding plants and all of my vegetable plants didn't quite fit into my budget. And so I started seeding myself in my home. I found it very rewarding to begin to grow all of my own seedlings, to be able to transplant out in the springtime, and also it was fun. It was a real sense of accomplishment just to be able to know that I started from a tiny little seed and was able to bring this into a plant that went into the garden and then produced all kinds of fruits and vegetables and flowers. I have perennial borders and annual borders all over the place. So it's a lot of fun, very, very rewarding. There's a lot of folks that I have met over the past year and a half, especially with COVID, that are looking at starting to seed again. Or maybe not again, but starting for the very first time. And so there's a lot of questions. When do I begin? How do I begin? What should I use? There is a plethora of information out on the internet, and some of it is good, some of it is speculative, and so it can become very confusing when we begin to look like what's right, what's wrong. There's probably about, I did a quick search the other day, maybe 30 different recipes for a seeding mix that you can do in your own home. So that can be very overwhelming for a beginner. When do you start to seed? That is not an answer that I can say arbitrarily for every different package. I brought with me this morning a whole bunch of different seed packages. I've got seeds of purple coneflower, that echinacea, which is a great plant in the garden, can be used medicinally in the end or just to enjoy butterflies and birds. I find a lot of swallowtail and monarchs love this in the summer, and then come the fall and winter, I leave the seed heads on my plant, and then the chickadees and the goldfinch, they come and clean that off in the winter. So it can be fun, but when I seed this plant is going to be very different than when I will seed a lupin plant in my perennial garden, and again going to be very different from morning glories in my annuals, or maybe carrot seeds in the vegetable garden. So one of the things that you do want to do is look on the back of your seed package, and it's going to tell you when they should be sown, whether they should be sown indoors in a seeding tray like this, and we'll look at this a little bit later, or whether you want to direct sow them right outside. So choosing your timing for seeding is definitely worth taking time to do the reading on that and figuring out what your timing will be. Sometimes they'll just say 8 weeks till they can be planted. And they'll say to plant just after the last frost. I had a client in the store yesterday and she was Googling and she said, according to the almanac, the last frost prediction for this year will be May the 8th. My experience of 35 years of gardening is that June the 8th might have been a better guess. And so really what you want to do is be very cautious because your young seedlings, when you put them outside, they are not going to handle any frost. And we generally have had frost. This past year we went down to -5 on May the 28th. And it killed all of the seedlings that were in the gardens. So definitely, I would suggest that you're almost thinking the sort of end of May, 1st of June, and then you want to count back from that. So 8 weeks from the 1st of June is going to take us to the end of March, 1st of April. And so seeds that you want 8 weeks of growing before they go outside, you want to start them end of March. Tomato plants, pepper plants, those are going to want a little bit more time. They take a little bit longer to germinate. So we're going to start some of those end of February, early March. So there's not one answer for any of that. Geraniums, you would want to be starting now. But if I was going to start doing marigolds, or not, sorry, morning glory inside the house, I don't even want to start these till the 1st of May. Because they're going to germinate in 3 days and they're going to grow fast. So you really want to check the back of these packages and make sure that you've got a good timing in your mind. And by all means, if you have questions, call the garden center. We have lots of staff at all locations that'll be able to help you navigate that timing. What do little seedlings need? There's so many different things that we can talk about. I started some seeds 2 weeks ago, and I started them in the house in my light stand. You don't have to have a big fancy greenhouse light stand. I have built one, or I should say my husband built one for me. It's made of 2x4s and plywood, and the shelves are solid. And then we have the light fixtures that I could get from a box store, Canadian Tire, Home Depot, just a simple fluorescent light on chains, and then that can drop. And so the important thing is that you get your light on top. I have with me today this little light stand. This is a great little starting stand if you're going to be doing just some small greens for inside. You want to grow herbs in your kitchen. But the important thing, and what I wanted you to see with this, is that you can loosen your oh, this one's going to be tight on me. There we go. And you can bring your lights right down. When you're seeding, it is important, and you can see the light under here, that the light is actually just above the little plants. We don't want to be having or relying on light way up there with seedlings, or they'll start to stretch. So these guys here I had done on, well, 2 weeks ago. And a couple of things that I did. We're going to talk soil in a minute, but once I had my soil in my container and my seeds in my container, I had a heating mat. And I put this down, plugged it in, and set the tray on and the dome on. And I had germination within 24 hours of my first row, and that was radishes. They germinated really, really fast. And then the other that I germinated was a muslin mix of lettuces, and in the center I did some tomatoes. Because they all germinate at different times, these guys started really, really quick, and I had to keep my dome on for the tomatoes, so these guys grew and grew and grew. And then the lettuce started growing, and my tomatoes, they came up last. Ideally, what you want to do is to put different plants in different containers so you can control. When you have your dome on, that keeps a humidity and a moisture. And when you have warmth and you have humidity, you're going to get really fast germination, and you'll get really good, strong plants. So those are two key components, is having that heating mat and having a dome over top. I brought with me today some soil. Your seeding mix, there's all different recipes for seeding mix, but your basic components are to have some compost. That's going to give you nutrient. You want to have some either peat moss or cocoa husk fiber. That's going to give you lots of airy lift, and it's going to hold some moisture. And then you want to have some perlite or vermiculite, another element to keep a looseness in the soil. You don't want to be using any mix that actually has soil in it. It becomes too heavy. And when your soil is heavy, you run in the risk of having a lot of possibly fungal pathogens that will come into the soil, and we'll talk about that a little later. It's too dense for the little tiny fibrous roots to move through, and so you end up with just a lot of disappointment. So you want what's called a soilless mix or a seeding mix. I have one here that works really well. The mix we have here is produced by Fafard. This particular one is organic for those of you that are focusing on organic horticulture. And so when you have these mixes, they're very, very light and they're very dry. And I brought a mason jar with some cold water, and I'm going to just put some of this mix in for you to see that these mixes don't like cold water. That did not sink to the bottom. If I had put a handful of soil in there, it would have dropped right to the bottom. But this mix will probably float even when I'm done. And so if I were to take a new seeding tray, which I will grab one here, and I were to put all of my soil into my tray, and then I'm going to put my seeds in and water with cold water, what's going to happen is all the soil is going to pop up, the water's going to run down, and we have no idea where the seed went because it's really small. So what we want to do is we want to moisten our soil first. So I have a bucket of water here, and as we can tell that this cold water and the soil, they don't want to get along, what I've got in my bucket is nice warm water. So think of the water you would use to put a baby in a bath, nice warm water. This soil will just suck up that warm water. I want everyone to think about the summer, that hanging basket that you have, that you bought in a plastic pot, that looked gorgeous in May, and by the end of June, you're finding when you water it with your hose, the water runs across the top, down the side, and out the bottom, and the roots in the center of that root ball are just screaming for moisture. And that's because the soil, these soil mixes, it's dried out, and it's repelling cold water. So we want to have nice warm water, and then I can dump my soil into the warm water, and that's why I brought a bucket in to do, and then I can just mix it all up, and it just really nicely mixes in, and then you've got a nice moist soil. Interesting thing about soil, you'll see that my hands are quite dirty now, and I should have brought a cloth, but I didn't. But when I first put my hand in to take some soil and put it in that jar, my hands were still clean. When there's moisture in the soil, it's going to stick to your hands. So even when you're testing your plants in your home, do they need water? Stick your finger in the soil. If it comes out clean, yeah, it's thirsty. If it comes out looking like my hands, there's lots of water in there, so you don't need to water them. It's just kind of another side tip there for your house plants. So once you have your soil all nice and moist, now I can put this soil into my seeding trays, and the moisture is already there. So when I'm putting my seeds in, I don't have to worry about having to add water and having to have everything kind of pop up like what's happening there. I'm only going to do one tray. I've got an open package of seeds here. Now, seeds come in various sizes. Many of us have seen peanuts. They're nice and big. Even sunflower seeds, if you use those to go out and feed the chickadees up in Algonquin, it's a nice sized seed that you can see. But the ones that I have in my hand right now, they're a little small. These are more radish seeds. And so what I also have this little guy here. It measures out seeds, so I can put my seeds into it. Maybe if I can get it open with my wet hands. There we go. And I can drop all the seeds in. And then I can dial it. It has a dial so that I can dial to the size of seed. And I know you can't see that, but there's these tiny little holes to the size of seed. So now when I'm putting these down, instead of putting all the seeds in a row and getting a ton of seeds, I can actually control and just sort of go through and tap them out and just get 1 or 2 seeds in each spot. Sometimes what I did here is I did a row of seeds. This is what we used to do in the greenhouse. And so we would have all kinds of seeds. I was hoping to have some with secondary leaves so that I could show you that point, but we're not there. There's a few we might be able to prick off and put in. If you're going to direct sow into the smaller containers, you just want to put 2 or 3 seeds in each of these little cell packs. You don't want to be putting a lot, just 2 or 3. You don't want to only put a single seed in because not every seed will germinate. And if you are even if you're getting a 50% germination, if I've put 3 seeds in here, I may get 2 seeds germinate, and then I will let them grow till they have secondary leaves, and then I will leave the strongest one and pull the weakest one out, so that I then have 1 plant inside this little pouch. If I have more than 1 plant, I risk the roots of the 2 plants twining around each other and strangling them. So they might look good when they're small little plants, but by the time they get in the garden and start getting bigger, you'll find that they will choke each other out and they'll be weaker. So when you're in the garden center in the spring, I'm known for this because I'm a little bit always looking for a deal, and you go through and it's like, oh, this one's got 2, that's exciting, I want this one. That may not be the strongest plant, and they actually may not develop as well. So getting single plants is better. It's stronger. You'll have a stronger root system for them. When you are at a point that your seeds, here, sometimes I get ahead of myself. We've put our seeds in. We're going to put our dome on. So we have moistened our soil, put it in our tray. We have put our seeds in, we've put our dome on, it's sitting on that heating mat. The moisture that's in the soil is going to create a humidity in here, and you're going to see that in about a day all over the top of your dome. If you leave that dome off, this becomes its own little environment, and it's going to keep the moisture there. And you don't have to be worrying about watering these seeds until this dome comes off. And so if we leave our dome on, which I did, these have been in here for 2 weeks, and I have not needed to water at all. It's just been the moisture that was in the soil. Now that I am to the point that this dome needs to come off because the plants are getting bigger, now I'm going to have to start watering. My light source at the house is right here. It's 1 inch above the plants. I want to keep it bright. If I move that light up here, these are going to want to stretch, and they'll get really, really tall between the individual leaves, and then you end up with a weaker plant. When you're looking for bedding plants, for vegetable plants, you want to find plants and you want to grow plants that have very short stalk between the different sets of leaves. That's going to give you a much stronger plant, and it's going to give you more production. Once these guys start to develop, let me see if I can find, here we go. So when I was in the greenhouse, we would pull out a bunch of the seedlings, and then this was called pricking off. And so, here, I'll put that there. I'll move this here. And so after we've had our tray of all of our seeds, then we would get the trays with all the cell packs. And then we would go through and we would pull just one little plant. And then that little guy is now, should have brought a pencil. I always used a pencil. And then you just made a hole and you dropped it in. And we would go through and we would fill thousands of these trays so that you end up with just one little plant. With your seedlings, I gotta find one that looks really good. Not a lot of secondary leaves happening here. Here we go. With your seedlings, you are going to have, doesn't matter what the plant is, if it's a maple tree or if it's a carrot seed, you're going to have a first set of primary leaves. And these are them here. They basically look like two little circles coming out of the stalk. So you've got your root and your primary leaves. Everywhere from the primary leaf down can go into soil. So when I'm taking it from here and I'm putting it into the soil, I can drop it right down to those primary leaves. Above that, you get the secondary leaves. And you should wait until you have two sets of secondary leaves before you do what I'm doing. This is not going to be good for these guys here. But once you get two sets, so now I've got one secondary leaf and there looks like there's another one just starting to come. So now these guys can go into the soil, put them into the pot, and I can reduce. So this looks very stretched. Here's a, well, that wasn't very kind to that plant. We'll lift it up. So this is a radish plant. So here's our primary leaves. And you can just maybe see the secondary leaves starting to form. When I'm putting this into a larger pot, I can actually put it this deep in the soil. So if I have a pot here, I can put it right down to there. And now I've got, again, I want to keep my light source right here to keep it strong so that this next set of leaves isn't stretching all the way up to get the light. If you're doing seeding and you're doing a tray, say on a window ledge, if you've done this before, you'll find that your seedlings will germinate and they're going to all bend to the light. And so then you need to turn it so that then they all bend back to the light. And you're constantly doing this. You may actually have to do that 10 times a day so that the plants don't stretch, that they're just moving back and forth. But once they start stretching, then they're going to need some kind of support, and they just get weaker. So it is worth the investment. It doesn't need to be a big investment. You can buy $300 UV lights, or you can get a $20 fluorescent light. The important thing is that you get light right on top of those plants. Put it on a chain. As the plants grow, one chain link up, and just bring it up one at a time as your plants grow. Couple of things that I like to do. I brought an egg carton with me. Egg cartons have a lot of purposes beside putting eggs in them. When you fill the egg carton up with soil, you have a nice seeding pocket again. This one I'll just, there we go, have a nice little tray. And so now I could put my basil seeds in here. I would just direct sow a few of the seeds at a time in it, not hundreds of seeds, just a couple in each one. And then the neat thing about this is when these are ready to go in the garden, I can just cut these off and put them right in the garden. The roots will actually grow right through your egg carton, and that will give you kind of an organic way rather than using the plastic ones that we have to, well, they're not even recycled anymore. So these, the only way you can recycle this is to do it again next year. So don't crumple them all up. After you use them, wash your containers so that you can use them next year. And why do we want to wash them? Sometimes soils can develop fungal pathogens. And I have seen where we end up with a tray. It would be a sad thing. You'd go into a big greenhouse and you'd have a tray, and all of a sudden all the plants are all laying on their side. And right at the base of the plant in the soil, where the small stem and the soil joins, is a little brown spot. And that's a fungal disease, and that will kill the plant. It kills right down through the root. We used to use a product called Damp Off, which we could then spray, and that would kill off the fungus. And that is no longer available to us because of the pesticide ban. They have eliminated that product for home use. But there are a few things you could do. You could take like a teaspoon of hydrogen peroxide and a couple cups of water. You could make a spray. That will be effective against it. The other thing, if you see that, a very light dusting of cinnamon will also bring a fungal problem to bay. But you don't want to, it's not a pre-treat. You don't just put cinnamon on here so that you don't get a fungal. It's a treatment if you do have it. So if you're finding that your seedlings are starting to go limp, they're falling over, and you see that little brown spot right above the soil line, that is definitely evidence of a fungal problem. And you want to get right on it because it'll travel through the soil, and if this little corner starts to go, if I don't take care of it, it's going to travel right through my whole seeding tray. So we also then, at the end of the season, I don't want to take the risk that there's any pathogens attached to my trays. So I want to give them a really good cleaning with soap and water, rinse with bleach, and then I can store them, and I have a nice clean product to use again next year when I'm doing my seeding. The other thing I wanted to mention, for those of you like me that like to do things themselves, I don't always need to use a big seeding tray. Sometimes I'm just doing a few small things. I like this little set here because it's got these tiny little trays where I can do, I'm not sure if you can even see me here, these little trays where I can just put in some, maybe some spinach in this one, and then I don't have a dome this small, but I can just take some saran wrap and put it on top until everything germinates. Or I could put some fresh basil in here, and then I will have these in my kitchen. This is a great little set to put on my counter so that I can keep fresh herbs growing all through the year. But the other thing I use, this is our regular egg carton. But we've all seen that omega-3 egg carton, that real expensive one where you're paying $5, $6 for your box of eggs. But it has a wonderful plastic container that has a tray, the individual spots for your 12 eggs, which we could use as planting pockets, and it has a dome. So it's a wonderful tray to use if you wanted to do something right in your kitchen on your window ledge that you're going to be watching. If you're like me, you're in the kitchen all the time, whether it's to grab a drink, grab a snack, just to see the sunshine in the window, and you can just keep turning it so that it's getting its adequate light. So it's another kind of little neat tray thing that I've seen to be able to use those cartons for more than just one purpose. Another way of planting, we have these little planting plugs. Here, I've got some here. These little discs. And again, these little discs, see my soil's still floating. If I were to pop this disc into cold water, I'm going to be a month of Sundays before it explodes. I put some in a dish of warm water earlier today, and these guys were up in 10 minutes. I was so excited. So these make nice little planting pockets. They're made of peat. They're peat pellets. I can just drop these into my egg carton. And again, there's an opening. I can put some seeds in the top. But what I really like these for is doing cuttings. Some things I prefer to do cuttings than seeding, and I know I'm a little off topic, but I brought a rosemary here because rosemary is one of my favorite herbs to use in the garden, so I like to have lots of it. And I like to have big plants, so I don't start from seed. I'd rather start from a cutting. So I can take a nice fresh cutting, about 2-3 inches, and then I'm going to pull off the leaves. And of course, this doesn't go in the compost. This goes in tonight's potatoes. So I'll probably have to stick these in my purse to take home. Oops, now I just broke it. Okay, well that whole one's going to go home. Let me start another one. So we're going to get a 2-inch cutting. Really all we want to have is to have maybe 2 or 3 sets of leaves on the top. So we want to take the other leaves off. I'm going to stop talking so I can focus a little bit and not break this one. There we go. Take one more off. There we go. So I take the leaves off so that my stem is clean. And then I'm going to dip this into a rooting hormone, which I have here. It's just a little powder. And this is just going to stimulate the stem cell growth for the rooting function on the stem. So I just need to have a little dip of that, and then it can just slide right into this hole in the center of these little peat pellets. And just need to keep this moist, not soppy wet, but moist. And if I were to put a dome over top of this, the moisture that's in there will be fine. And this should start showing roots in probably 2 to 3 weeks. And you will actually see the roots come right out the side. So now you know you've got a good healthy plant. This goes straight into the garden in the 1st of June. One of the questions that I'm often asked is, when do I fertilize, and do I fertilize this? I'm going to say no, you're not going to fertilize this at all. We have, with your soil mixes, if you're using compost or the soil mixes that you purchase, they already have nutrient in them. It's enough nutrient for all of these little seedlings. Once we start potting them up, and let's say I've got this potted up here, I might as well pot this one up. Get that root right down to the bottom. Once this is potted up, now I've got one little set of primary or secondary leaves coming. We got a question, but I just want to do this first. One set of secondary leaves. Once I've got 2 or 3 sets of secondary leaves, now I can use a very small amount of fertilizer. I would use a transplant fertilizer, which is 10-52-10. Middle number, very high. It's got a lot of phosphorus in it. It's going to stimulate a lot of root growth. But I wouldn't use it full strength. At this point, with the young plants, I'm going to want to use it probably about 1/2 to 1/3 strength until I get the plants out into the garden. We have a question from online.
When you have seeds left over in the packet, how do you store them and for how long?
Okay, so the question was, do we have seed? We've used some seeds. We have them left over in our packet. What do I do with those seeds? There's a couple of things. This particular packet that I picked up, it's dill, and on the back it says sow by December 2022. That means I've got this year and next year for these seeds. So most seeds are good for a year or two. And so you want to check the back of your package for that. So when I'm in the garden, and it's lots of fun, we'll talk about direct sowing, and because this is where I usually run into it, I buy a package of carrots, seeds. There are hundreds of seeds in here. And so my carrot seeds are good till 22 as well. And so I'll go out to the garden. And one of the things that I want to be careful with in the garden is that I'm not making too deep of a trench. So I've got my row, it's 20 feet. I have a very big garden. It's 50 by 50, and it's a lot of work. But I've got my row where my carrots are going to go. I'm just going to take the, we'll pretend, I could use the handle of these clippers, but generally I'll use the handle of my hoe, and I'll just kind of do a nice thin line. So it's only ½ inch deep, doesn't need to be very deep at all. I will use one of these little things, otherwise my fingers are so big I'm putting tons of seeds in. Or if I have the grandchildren there, I put a few seeds, and they're meticulous to go one seed at a time down the row. It's great, keeps them occupied. Regardless, we still have seeds left over in the package. So what I do is, and what you saw, I had some here. These are some extras from there. I leave them in the package. That way I know what they are. The extra seeds are in the package. I fold it over, and I will have a clip like this, just clip all of my extra seed packets together. And these I store in my linen closet. It's dark, it's dry, and it's warm. It's not hot, and it's not cold. Yes, next question.
If seeds were collected last fall, do they need to be cleaned before they're planted?
So the question is, if seeds were collected last fall, do I need to clean them before I've planted them? I would say that, one, depends on the seed, and two, if I was going to clean seeds, I would have cleaned them when I collected them. Part of the reason for that, if you have soil left around seeds, and I see this actually with roots. So let's say dahlias, you want to save the tubers, and you lift them all in the fall. If you leave all that soil around the dahlia tuber, it's going to dry that tuber right out, and the life of the tuber will just extinguish. Same with a potato. If you don't clean it right away, the soil left around it is going to actually pull all the moisture outside. But if you've collected seeds from last fall, it depends on the plant. Some of them need a cold treatment, so you would have to check that. A lot of perennials, they need to have a period of cold before they can be seeded. And to do that, you can simply put them in the fridge sometimes for just a week before you sow them. So you want to look at the variety of seed that you've collected. I have a special variety of poppy seed that I grow so that I can harvest for lemon poppy seed bread, which is my favorite, and that seed needs to have its cold. So, but I direct sow that in the fall so that they have their natural winter and let it go, and it's never failed me that way. But so cleaning the seed, definitely do that when you harvest them. That would be the best time. Direct sowing in the garden is a lot of fun. And there's a lot of things that you can do direct sow. If you're looking for a vegetable garden, tomatoes, peppers, cabbages, anything in that kind of cabbage family, cauliflower, broccoli, some of those larger plants, you would want to start indoors. But to do direct seeding, all of your carrots, peas, and beans, most of your squashes and watermelons, the zucchinis and cucumbers, all that stuff can be direct sown. I usually do that around the long weekend in May because we're putting that seed into the ground, and we've got usually another week or two before we're seeing the plant growth, and so we can not worry about the frost so much. If you direct sow and you find your germination rate is nice and quick, you've got a nice sunny area, the soil's warm, it's germinated really quickly, and you hear a frost is coming, get a frost blanket on it at night, and that will help to hold some heat. Also, just to give a very light sprinkling or a spray using a spray bottle. Whoops, I've got one here. Just to kind of spray those young plants early spring. That moisture on the leaves of those plants is going to actually repel the frost. It's going to keep the frost off the cell structure of the plant and help it to get through some of those cold nights. Yeah, so it's a lot of fun to direct sow and put a lot of plants straight in the garden. One year I did, what did I do? Morning Glory Instead of direct sowing it in the garden, I started it in March in my seeding tray. And in 3 days, I had germination. And then my morning glory seeds, there's a picture of morning glories. There are lots of colors, often blue, but here's a nice pink one. They start to grow, and they're a vine, and they grow fast. And so all of a sudden in March, early April, I have all of these plants that are now this big, and they're vines, and they're all over one another. I did it way too early, and I had a bit of a mess on my hands. Now, what I ended up doing was taking a piece of plywood, I put some holes in it, I ran strings down the holes, I put the plywood just over top of my plants and got them all to twine up. And as they grew, I lifted that plywood and had 6-foot plants by June to put out in my garden. Question?
Is there a recommendation for bulk sowing indoors for a community garden project? And can you touch on hardening off the seedlings when they're ready?
Okay, so bulk sowing, thinking of community gardens, and then hardening off. So we'll talk those two things. My recommendation is you either need to set up a grow factory where you have large areas with fluorescent lights. That's going to be your most economic for a community garden so that you can get the light. Light is going to be huge. Or if you have a greenhouse available to you to use where you've got all kinds of natural light, you can keep lights on as well. That is going to be your best, because your biggest thing with seeding is going to be light and keeping the humidity and warmth in the soil for the plants. So yeah, either a greenhouse, or if I were to say take this table and I had this full of seeding trays, I'm going to want to have 4 sets of double fluorescent lights hanging down right on top that I can then start to raise them as the plants grow. So that would be kind of a way that I would approach it if I was, say, doing it in my basement for the community garden. Get myself a nice 8-foot by 4-foot piece of plywood table, fill it with seeding trays, sew them in. The thing is if you sew this full, now I need to transplant it to this. One seedling at a time. So you may find you're only using 2 or 3 trays for germinating, and then you're going to put it into 20 trays for plants. So make sure you're thinking of having enough room, because then those plants need time to grow as well. So they need space and light. Once you are coming into the May season, and our weather is getting warmer, there's the temptation to want to put our plants right outside. But they need to get used to the frost, they need to get used to colder temperatures at night, and they need to get used to colder soil. So one way of doing it, what we call hardening off, is to take my plants. We'll take this poor little guy, he's not looking too happy. We're going to take this guy, we're going to put him outside during the day, and we're going to bring him back in at night. So he's getting used to that weather outside and the temperatures outside. As long as it's over 50 degrees, you should be fine. Let me translate that. What would that be? 10, 12 degrees Celsius? Then you'll be fine. And then in at night when the temperatures are going to drop. But you want to think about the sun. If I put this out on a south porch during the day, and the sun's beating on this, that would be like putting a newborn baby out in the sun, and it's going to get a terrible sunburn, and none of us want to do that. So ideally, when I do my hardening off, it goes on the north side of the house in a shady spot during the day, and then back in at night until the plants and the weather sort of start to come together. Did you have another question? Okay, so with these domes, you've got a couple of different types. This is a really tall dome, so it'll allow you to leave the plants in their space longer and keep the humidity. And this guy's got vents. So you can open it up if you see too much humidity to let some of that out, and close it up to create humidity. So that's kind of a nice feature. This guy here that I used, there's no vents, and so especially with the heating mat, this heated up, and it was like a cloud inside. And so what I did is I would take it off for a couple hours during the day, dry this off, and then I would put it back on so that I could regulate the humidity. And that's a really good question, because if we have too much heat and humidity, that is a wonderful environment for some of the fungus to grow. And yet, if we don't have any at all and our soil gets dry, you can see how difficult it's going to be to water. This end, now that I've had the dome off, this side here, if I were to pour water on it, I've got a watering can here, you won't be able to see it, but it's just sort of sitting on top. It's not even going in. What I like to do if you do need more water is this guy's a watering can and a spritzer, and I keep forgetting that, but is to just to spray it, just to spritz it until you can get enough moisture on the top, and then use your dome again to create that humidity. But yeah, very important, if you're finding you've got a cloud in there, you want to lift it off, let it air out, take a paper towel, dry it, and then you can put it back on. Another question?
The difference between sowing seed indoors in the soil is mixed, and why we don't do that outdoors. So the question says, is the reason we do not use soil indoors because of the higher risk of disease when you sow directly into the soil outdoors?
Okay, so question was, there's different soils. I'm using a soilless mix indoors. When I go out in the garden, obviously that's a soiled mix. We're not using anything special. And so why the difference? And would an outdoor soil indoors be too heavy and create more of a fungus problem? Definitely yes, the heavier soil is going to hold moisture. You're going to get even more chance for even roots rotting, even without the fungal issue. I think the other thing is it's a difference in the seeds. Certain seeds, certain plants respond better to the direct sowing. And but the other thing is you want to look at your vegetable garden. When we're doing even if it's annuals, if you're going to like Bachelor Buttons, Cosmos, you can direct sow those in the garden, and they're going to pop up and still give you a nice colorful show in the summer. But in our gardens, if we just have a heavy clay, it doesn't matter what we direct sow, it's not going to work well. We still need to amend the soil. So my vegetable garden that I have, it's rototilled in the fall, it's rototilled in the spring. I'm always amending it with compost that I have from my compost. I make my own compost, but I also will sometimes add some peat moss to it, depending on what I'm growing in different areas. And some of the things that I direct sow, like my carrot seeds, some of those, what I'll do is I'll actually take a handful of sand and I'll run that over the area that I'm going to be seeding, just to create a little bit more drainage and a little bit more oxygen in that area for them. So it's not like going out into the woods and just, oh, here's a patch of earth and I'm going to sow seeds. We still need to take care of the soil and amend the soil in our gardens where we're direct sowing. Well, another question.
This Jessica has a true greenhouse in full sun, but not heated. Can she start all of her seedlings in it, and when can she do so, or does she still need to start indoors and move them out?
So we have a greenhouse in full sun without being heated. That's a very fun experience, and I'm going to encourage you to take a look if you're it sounds like you like to do things yourself. Look up citrus in the snow. Google that. You will have a lot of fun. This guy is in Nebraska. He's growing citrus trees under a greenhouse and using geothermal heat that he has developed himself. And it's really cool, not expensive, definitely an adventure. The answer to your question is, what is the temperature doing at night? Because a greenhouse during the day in the sun in February, it could be 85, 90 degrees in there. It's a wonderful environment. But when our temperature drops to minus 25, what's happening in your greenhouse? Is it able to hold the heat? What this guy has done in Nebraska is he's actually submerged his greenhouse 4 feet down into the soil. Only the top is what is in the sun, and so he's below the frost line. He's able to control temperature a little better. So that is going to be your concern. What's happening at night, not what's happening during the day. The daytime, not a problem at all. It's an ideal place for your seeding and for your young plants. But at nighttime, what is happening? You may find that even just getting some heating mats or creating a heated table that you can put all of your plants on, that you don't need to heat the whole space, but just to keep that soil warm and from freezing at night, it will work for you. But that's going to be your biggest concern is nighttime.
So on the temperatures being still, there's a customer asking about sowing seeds in sunny windows that cools off at night. Is that trade?
Seeds on a sunny window. So a seed tray, you've got it on say a south window or a west window, but at night there's a draft and it's getting cold. I'm going to take it back to the same as the greenhouse. How cold is it getting? Go to the dollar store, pick up a little thermometer and stick it there, and go look at it at about, well, you'll have to set an alarm, but usually 4 a.m. is the coldest period. But see if you can watch what the temperature's doing. If it's staying above 50 degrees, you'll be okay. It's not going to damage your seedlings at all. It will slow it down, but it's not going to damage them. If it's actually going to drop to freezing, that's where you're going to run into a problem. Yeah.
Can you touch on soil mixes? We've had several questions about soil ratio mixes of compost to peat, worm castings, can those be incorporated, and also what to recommend for an outdoor raised garden bed.
Okay, so lots of questions on soil. I brought with me, now it's all watered and soiled, a couple of recipes for a seeding mix. So depending on the volume that you wanted to do. So 4 parts of compost, 1 part of perlite, 1 part vermiculite, and 2 parts peat moss. And that's going to give you a nice mix. The thing with the compost, I have to look at my compost. Sometimes my compost is pretty heavy. It's still got some bigger stuff. You want to have a nice sifted compost so that it's very fine when you're doing a seeding mix. Or you could even just do 2 parts compost, 2 parts of your either cocoa fiber or peat moss, and 1 part perlite. A lot of people are staying away from vermiculite. Vermiculite has received a bit of a scare over the years. Some vermiculite mines had some asbestos in it. Those have all been closed. Anything that you can buy today that's vermiculite is clear of asbestos. It is not an issue, but people tend to be concerned with that, so you can certainly do a mix without it and just have your perlite. If you're using worm castings, you want to treat your worm castings as the compost because it's a little heavier. And so then you want to be adding to that equal or higher amounts of peat or cocoa fiber, depending on which side of which camp you want to sit on harvesting those elements, and then add half the amount or 1 part of perlite to that. And that would give you a nice seeding mix. When you're getting into raised gardens, there is the 4-foot gardener. He has a very specific mix. I apologize that I don't have it off the top of my head, but I don't know that it's necessary to have to do that specific of a science for vegetable gardening. A raised garden is going to be very similar as a garden right at soil level, in that you need to have amendment, you need to have soil, you need to have compost, you need to have something to lighten it, whether it's cocoa fiber or peat moss. There's no need to put vermiculite and perlite into a raised garden bed. But what you want to do when you're looking at your soil, you want to be able to have a nice fluffy soil. You want to be able to squeeze the soil, open your hand, and have it loosely hold the shape. If it's holding its shape, you know that you've got a good mix. If I were to squeeze this and I've got such a tight shape in it, I even have some pine needles in here. I have such a tight shape in it that it's like a sculpture. I could bake it in a kiln and paint it. You know you've got too much soil. It's too heavy. The young roots aren't going to be able to get through. If I were to pick up the soil and open my hand and it's just falling through and it's like dust, there's not enough to hold it together. And so we need to add a bit more compost. We need to add a bit more humus to it. We need to add maybe some more of our either peat or cocoa fiber just to give it some bulk. So I guess I'm a little more of a casual gardener than a science gardener. We could get down to a science and spend a lot of science to grow the most optimum plant. And I find in my area where I live, we're just outside of CFB Trenton, great Canadian air base, and I have a lot of clients who are growing organic gardens. And I tend to err on organic in that I don't use a lot of chemical. I try to do things as natural as I can. But if I were to spend all of my money and energies on a raised bed, putting in organic soil, buying organic plants and organic seeds, using organic fertilizer, and then a HERC or a CF18 comes flying over and they lose their jet fuel and it sprinkles itself all over the Quinte area, is my garden organic? It's a question I have to ask. The 401 is all of but maybe, I don't know, 5 minutes from my home with an awful lot of carbon monoxide happening in the air around my garden. Is my garden organic? And so if I spent all of my energies worrying about the actual science of it, I would get myself tied up in a knot. So I'm, as I say, I'm pretty casual about stuff like that, and I just look for a good feel of my soil. If you're a brand new gardener, that's not going to mean anything to you, because should it feel like? I grew up with gardens all around me, and I spent time with some of the neighbors and whatnot learning. So you know what? Bring a Ziploc baggie of soil into the garden center here and say, hey, what do you think of my soil? I am not going to say, oh, it's got this pH, it's got enough of this or enough of that. But I can generally look at the soil and say, you know what, you could add a little peat moss to that, lighten it up, and then you're going to be good to go for your vegetable garden. Or I could say, gosh, that needs to get some more humus in it. Add a few bags of just garden soil, topsoil, and that's going to help to bulk it up. So that would be if you're a beginner gardener and you're really unsure. There's also, with raised gardens, Conan's sells a wonderful garden mix, bulk soil. It's all mixed, ready to go, and that's what I use in my gardens, and they've been very successful, tend to do well with feeding plants. I think we have time maybe for one or two more questions. Do we have? No, we're all good. If you have any further questions, by all means, send us an email at sales@conans.ca. We will be more than happy to get back to you and to answer any of your questions, or come into any of our 3 locations, Waterdown, Newmarket, or Trenton, and our staff will be more than thrilled to help you out and answer your questions, help you make selections. I hope you have a great time seeding. I hope you have a great gardening season. I am looking forward to spring, and it'll be good to see you then. Bye.